On weighing T versus theory now. I'm going to give a quick little background about when this is most used in debate. And are you listening, Kirk?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. When this is most used in debate and what this debate typically looks like, as well as tips in terms of executing this debate. So the first thing is when this is most used in debate. Obviously, this is most used or most relevant when the 1n reads a T shell and the 1AR up layers with a theory shell, right? So in this case, what we have is the negative claiming the AF was not topical and the affirmative claiming that something the neg did is unfair. And so now it's a question of, let's say the AF was right that the neg did something unfair and the neg was right that the AF was untopical, right? Which one is more important? I.e., which one outweighs? Which one comes first? So there's two ways to resolve the weighing debate. One is in terms of the specific arguments in that round, where you analyze the magnitude of the abuse and compare it, right? And two is to make arguments that T outweighs theory in a vacuum, or vice versa. So what we're going to focus on is the second method right now of resolving the weighing debate between a theory shell and a T shell. Make sense? Okay. So we want to come up with arguments for why in a vacuum T outweighs theory, which means that if you win the theory debate or the T debate, you win the round, or by theory outweighs T, which means that even if you lose the T debate but you win the theory debate, you win the round. This debate is really analogous to fairness versus education in terms of its function, right? The function of fairness versus education is to explain to the judge on the line by line which arguments matter most. I.e., do the fairness links matter most, or do the education links matter most?
But like, I thought that in fairness versus education, it was more of like strength of link times strength of impact. Like, even if say like fairness outweighs, if you're winning a significant strength of link to education, you still could win the round. But
so good. This is the same exact in this case.
Oh, I thought like if you win T comes first, the judge just evaluates T first.
Well, not necessarily. So this weighing is definitely strength of impact weighing, that T is much more important on the impact debate than theory. But that does not change that theory still has an impact on the theory debate. So similar to fairness versus education, if you conclusively win fairness comes first, that does not mean education's irrelevant. It just means education comes second. Okay, so all too often we simplify it and we say because fairness versus education resolved in terms of fairness, all that matters is fairness. That's not the case, right? There's still an education impact, it's just less important. So similarly on T versus theory, there's still a theory impact, it's just less important. Sure. So what that means is that if the T debate is really close or really muddled, or there's just a minor link being generated out of T, conceivably the less important impact, i.e. the theory debate, could outweigh the T debate if the strength of link on the theory debate is really, really significant, i.e. it's really clear that the negative was abusive, and the AF is really handedly winning the theory shell, but the T debate's super close. Right? Now, in general, what you said is right, that the winner of the T versus theory debate, in terms of which one comes first, will explain to the judge which shell they vote off of. Right? If you win T comes before theory, then almost always the winner of the debate will be on T. And then only once T is resolved, if it's resolved in favor of the affirmative and it's determined that the AF was not untopical, then we go to theory. So theory becomes the secondary question, right? So in the model I just described, theory is still the secondary question, but it's conceivably a secondary question that can outweigh the first question in a hyper-specific scenario where the first question has a lot of competing defense on the claim and the debate's muddled there. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So when do we execute this debate? So ideally, the 1AR starts this debate when it reads a theory shell. More often than not, the 1AR does not do it. So the way this would look is you would start your 2NR, and I would say there's going to be a big picture overview on a separate sheet of paper, and then we're going to go to the T debate, and then we're going to go to the 1AR shell. And so the big picture overview would be, first question you need to resolve is which comes first, T or theory. T comes first for several reasons. A point is this, B point is this, C point is this, D point is this. Next question you need to resolve is the paradigm for evaluating the T debate and the theory debate. Competing interests is definitely the one you should prefer over reasonability. Several reasons. A point is this, B point is this, D point is this. So you do all your paradigm weighing in a separate sheet of paper.
Wait, but what if the paradigm? What if the paradigm will add original responses to it?
To it on the line by line of the T shell, then it might make more sense in that particular round to go to that particular argument on the line by line.
Okay, so.
But the point is that the order of the speech should start at paradigm issues. So you can have a separate sheet of paper where the only paradigm issue really addressed in depth is T versus theory, right? It's also conceivable that the 1AR and the 1N did not have any fairness versus education weighing. So it could be the case that in your 2NR new overview, you have T versus theory and fairness versus education. And then you conduct the competing interests versus reasonability debate on the line by line.
Sure.
Does that make sense? But the bottom line is, the thing we keep coming back to is that it's really important on theory debates, especially in the 2NR and the 2AR, to resolve the paradigm issues first. So this requires you to identify which paradigm issues are important and how much you want to invest in those. And the question of how much you want to invest in those depends on whether or not you can afford to lose it. Make sense? Okay. So here's how we're going to do this drill. I'm going to read a bunch of reasons T comes before theory, and then I'm going to give you 3 minutes of prep time, and you're going to respond to them. And then we're going to improve your responses, and then we're going to switch sides. Okay? So let me know whenever you're ready.
I'm good.
Okay. 1. T is a question of jurisdiction. If the AF isn't topical, then the judge can't vote off the AC offense, which means T is a prior question to evaluating the rest of the debate. 2. Non-topical AFs force me to be abusive because I'm debating off my prep and need to compensate for 1 AC advantages, meaning T outweighs because A, it occurred first and framed any other theory violations, and B is the most severe impact because it gives the AF a monopoly on preps. 3. T is the most important in the context of switch side debate because it is the mechanism by which we ensure that the AF is predictable and the neg has the ability to engage the AC. 4. T outweighs because it's the only codified rule. Theory and terms are just made up by debaters, but the only thing that we have going into the round is the topic.
What is number 3?
Number 3 is that T is most important in the context of switch side debate because it's the mechanism by which we ensure that the AF is predictable and the neg has the ability to engage the AC. What's the order?
My mind and reasons why theory outweighs.
Okay.
But there's still going to be offense that's going to function. Yeah.
Okay.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
The first argument is that T is a question of jurisdiction. Why this begs a question of why jurisdiction is important? You don't establish that. Second is in period 9, judges have voted on non-topical AFs, like critical AFs all the time, which means that there's some other purpose than jurisdiction. 3, turn, the purpose of the judge is to adjudicate the better debater, also to be educated. That's appeal to theoretical impacts, which means theory comes first. Your second argument is that there's going to be non-topical AF. Your eighth point that comes first, that's coming first or coming second is irrelevant. It's a question about the magnitude of abuse on the theory. It's a question of magnitude of abuse on the theory issue. For example, on Utah weighing, you don't simply win on Utah weighing simply because your impact comes first. You actually have to do the weighing yourself. Now, your reason why it's more severe is that you say you can't prepare for the argument. One is appeals to a theory standards of predictability, and second is not contextualized within a round. If I'm able to show that the strength of link on this question is really small, that means that theory should come first. Your third argument is that T is important in terms of switch side debate, or in turn, theory is more important because T only sets a burden on the affirmative, i.e. what the affirmative can do, not what the negative does. However, theory says theory applies to both the affirmative and the negative, which means that appeals more to switch side debate. And second, it begs the question of the impact to switch side debate. You don't establish that. Your fourth argument is that only codified rule, however, norm setting on theory solves. And when you win an interpretation or counter interpretation, we presume that to be the norm for the future debates, which that sets codified rules, even if there's not an explicit codified rule to begin with. Theory comes first. one is that there's always competing definitions on what is ultimately going to be topical, which what is ultimately going to be topical, which means that it's very arbitrary for the topicality. However, it's not true for theory because there's only a certain set of theory interpretation. Second, the way topicality is resolved via theoretical interpretation and theoretical weighting, which means that even if you in topicality comes first, there has to be a mechanism to do that weighting, which is that theory still functions as a prior question.
Okay, so let's start with this last argument you made. I think you're making it wrong. I know what you're trying to say. The way you should make this argument is that fairness and education are the terminal impacts on both T and theory, which means that it's a question of the size of the links into those terminal impacts. It can't be the case that T just comes first in a vacuum. We should be forced to compare those internal links. Right? That's what you mean by theory is the mechanism.
Sure.
Right? Theory, in this case that you're referring to in terms of the mechanism, is fairness and education.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So just frame it as such then. Right? Because currently the way you're making it doesn't make any sense. Like,
Okay.
there's no real warrant for why theory is... But when we say theory is the mechanism by which we determine T, that would literally mean that you have to resolve the 1AR shell to decide who's topical. Right? Which doesn't make sense, because the topicality shell is what we need to resolve to see who's topical.
Sure, yeah.
Agreed? Okay. So that's the first thing, is I think that your last argument needs to be reframed. So let's go down the line. I think that the argument you did best on is jurisdiction. You were efficient, and the arguments were concise, and they were good. I don't have any criticism for you whatsoever on jurisdiction. I think you made the exact right arguments. It's worth your time to write these out in a front line, in my opinion. But it gets a little bit worse as we go down the list. So let's go to number 2. I think that this number 2 argument is the best argument that's being made in the block for why T outweighs. So the A point on the number 2 is that T is a prior question because your abuse occurred first and it frames all other theory violations, right? So I think the first thing you need to point out here is that the 1N could have still engaged against a non-topical AF without being unfair, i.e. it had options available to it that did not force it to be unfair. Because if you beat back that assumption, that means that he didn't have to necessarily read theory. Or you didn't that he didn't have to necessarily read something that merited you responding with theory. Right? So I feel like the 8 point here can be you have framework NCs. Like, you can engage with non-topical AFs via the framework debate.
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so we're trying to establish that you can respond to a non-topical AF in a way that's not unfair. Like, i.e. a non-topical AF doesn't force the neg to be abusive.
Oh,
right, because Jackson's point is that you're forcing me to be abusive because I'm debating off my prep, and I need to compensate for your advantages, right?
Sure.
So your point needs to be that there are other ways to compensate for your advantage without being abusive. So the A point is you can do framework. The B point is you can read a K. And the C point is you can read T. These are 3 legitimate options you have against non-topical AFs. None of these options make it okay for you to do what you did that was unfair. Right? I.e., you have plenty of recourse to engage an unfair AF, or an untopical AF, rather. It doesn't force you to be unfair. So that takes out both of the arguments in that case. Then you want to go through the A and B. So the A point is it occurred first, and so it frames all other theory violations. I think that the way you're responding to it is quite good. I think your util analogy is wordy. It took you too long to make it.
Okay.
I don't even know if you need an analogy here.
Okay.
Right? And so the second argument I would make here is that this assumes that being untopical forces you to be abusive. You have to win that assumption, which means if you're not winning the arguments that I just made, then this is irrelevant. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. The B point is that it's the most severe impact because it gives the AF a monopoly on prep. I think that this argument is interesting.
Wait, what was the visa point?
The B point for why that means T outweighs is that it's the most severe impact because it gives AF a monopoly on prep. Make sense? Um, so we have to respond to this argument. I think that your responses are interesting but not very good. Like your first argument is that this appeals to predictability, and your second argument is it doesn't apply because we have to look at strength of link, right? So I think that the predictability argument could be good, but it's not articulated clearly enough here. What you need to do is, I think, indicate that AF only gets monopoly on prep when like maybe you could say something like this AF was disclosed, so I don't have a monopoly on prep. Right? So not just say it relies on predictability, but prove that the predictability link is at least questionable in your direction.
Sure.
Make sense? Okay. I think also the strength of link argument you're making makes a ton of sense here, that we have to weigh the harm of the AF having a monopoly on prep, if it indeed does have a monopoly on prep, against the disadvantage of whatever you did that was unfair. Right? Additionally, you should contest the third argument here I would make is just a cross application of the arguments at the top of the number 2, which is that you are contesting whether or not the AF has a monopoly on prep because you're pointing out that the neg has several recourse available to it.
Am I making arguments on 2 directly? Wouldn't that apply to the second?
It does, yeah. But you just need to keep in mind for yourself that those arguments do apply directly.
Okay. Sure.
Right?
So
I would just put like an overview on number 2. I'd be like, overview on your second argument. A point is, overview on your second argument. The key assumption here is that I'm forcing you to be abusive. Several reasons that's not the case. A point is that you have access to framework NCs. B point is you have access to critiques. And C point is you have access to topicality. All these arguments indicate that there is recourse available for you that doesn't force you to be abusive. You can still engage with the AF in a non-abusive manner. Your choosing to be abusive was an autonomous decision that the one NC made, which it should be punished for. That doesn't mean that T automatically comes first. It means we have to weigh the internal links back into fairness and education, which is what we're both ultimately impacting to. Make sense? Okay. Then I would say, on the line by line, against your A point, begs the question for why speaking first matters, right? It's not a question of who speaks first, second, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, AT switch side debate. One, I think, I didn't catch your first argument here, actually.
That turn theory is more important in terms of switch side debate because T only sets a burden on the what the affirmative can do. Like theory is bidirectional, which is that it sets norms on what the affirmative and negative can do.
Okay, I like that. Works for me. The next argument you have is that it begs the question of switch side debate. What was that?
Begs the impact of switch side debate. You want to establish that.
Okay. I think that that's actually not necessarily true. I think that well, you're right that there's no explicit impact to switch side debate, right? It's not explicitly drawn out as we both have to debate both sides, so this is the most fair long-term norm, right? But that ultimately would be the impact. So you should probably engage with that in a little bit more depth, right? So the third argument I would make is this is a question of in-round versus future round abuse, right? It may be the case that in the long term, it is more fair for us to have T come before theory, but in this particular round, theory definitely outweighs T because it's a question of, like, my non-topicality was definitely marginal at best, but your abuse was significant. And prefer in-round over out-of-round because we don't know, like, it could very well be the case that you read non-topical apps when you're affirming. Right? Like, you presume that you're going to read a topical app, which is a presumption we can't verify. And then additionally, I would cross-apply the arguments you made on the number 2 here and say that those are directly responsive because you presume that the neg can't have the ability to engage the AC if the AF isn't topical. Right? Like, if I win any of those arguments, that indicates you still could have engaged.
Okay.
So perhaps the overview on number 2 should group 2 and 3.
Oh, sure.
So you respond to the number 1, then you group the second and third, you make all those arguments in the overview that we just talked about, and then you go to the line by line on number 2 and number 3. Cool? Okay. Last argument is it comes first because it's a codified rule. I think your norm setting solve, still a codified rule, is a good argument. I think additionally there's an argument here to be made that T interps only last for 2 months maximum. So they're not codified rules. The rules keep changing, i.e. the T interps that we establish as best on the living wage topic will no longer be discussed come the September-October topic.
Okay, sure, yeah. That's good, yeah.
Does that make sense?
I feel it to be difficult to generate reasons why theory outweighs in a vacuum instead of just like strength of length on or like length of these things, right? Because it's probably true that if we were in a vacuum, probably T comes first.
I agree. T probably does come first in a vacuum. So it is hard to prove the opposite. But I think you're doing a decent job generating some type of offense on this debate, right? Like, it's not the greatest offense, but it's like, it's something, right? Now tell me this, how long did that take?
147.
147. So presumably this would have been the 2AR.
Oh, okay.
So we don't have that type of time, right? You have to be able to get through this debate in 30 to 45 seconds.
Okay.
So one good argument against each plus the overview is probably sufficient. Now, again, this also depends on your judge, though. If you have a policy debater in the back of the room, you're going to have to invest more time on this because they have an innate understanding that T comes first, right? Or if you have somebody who's more policy inclined, like somebody such as Greg Ayton or Ryan Fink, right? They're just going to be innately more persuaded by the arguments that T comes first. And so that's totally fine, right? Different people can and legitimately do hold different ideas for how weighing should be resolved on the paradigm issues of procedural debate. And so it's important for us to adapt accordingly.
Okay,
Cool. So now we're going to switch sides, and we're going to do the other side of the debate.
Oh, I want to hear the arguments for this.
Okay, I'm ready whenever you are.
Do I still have to make the arguments like these specific arguments that you made?
It might be worth your time to try practicing to see, just as a purpose of the drill, to see if you can do it quickly.
Okay, yeah.
As just yet another practice on not being over wordy. Because that's a tendency that again and again and again we're seeing that you have.
I think it's also like I remember this advice from someone's like I read justification for like reject the argument as separate from like his rejected generic. So sort of like an overview. Like he told me to, or he or she, I don't remember, to like incorporate these arguments as responses. So I think like it's good practicing to see how we can like use these arguments to try to respond instead of an overview.
Yep. Okay. So let me know when you're ready. Okay. Theory outweighs T. First is theory controls long-term norms. It doesn't matter if one topic debate is screwed up. It's worse to have 4 years of bad debate. Second is the topic keeps changing, which means that the T norms have a limited impact, so I outweigh in terms of solvency for future abuse claims. Third is that there are multiple legitimate interps of the topic, while theory interps are binary, i.e. you must or must not read a plan, or you must or must not specify a country, you must or must not read a nib, or you may or may not read a nib, meaning that discussion of theory is more likely to create norms for debate. Additionally, norm creation is the most important impact in this in this debate because it's a question of what will be future debate. What future debates will look like, meaning that it has the largest internal link into ensuring that there will be fairness.
What is it?
The what? It controls long-term norms. It doesn't matter if one topic is debate is screwed up. It's worse to have 4 years of bad debate. So give yourself 2 to 3 minutes of prep time, and let's see how you do. Okay, so what's the order?
Order is going to be, I just broad overview type arguments on the norms debate, and then the impact level.
Okay.
After then it's okay. Broad overview type arguments, then specific the ABC, then the impact level. Ready? One, norms are incorrect. Nine, the eighth point of the norms are contradictory. People read RBIs and no RBIs all the time. The decent point is that no one cares about one specific debate round. And one specific debate round. The first is that no one's going to watch your debate rounds. And second, there are thousands of any debate rounds at any topic. The decent point is that norms have no solvency. People don't follow practices based on based on past debate rounds. For example, a tricks debater won't stop running tricks simply because he lost on this. These all function as criminal defense on your norms argument. Also, functions as a weighing argument because it shows that just an influence future debates, which means that your weighing is irrelevant. And second, theory norms can be established even without theory coming first. For example, a judge can resolve the theory debate, also the T debate, but it simply have the T comes first. The theory debate will still function as a norm for future rounds. Doesn't mean it has to come first. And three, turn topicality is the only codified rule that the government has to be topical. However, there's not a specific set of rules for the coming into a round. That means that doesn't change and it's binary. Even there are specific topicality interpretations on any given topic that's irrelevant because the whole overarching rule is still the same. Which outweighs are often done on your specific subpoints. The eighth point is that non-talking norm and its worse have 4 years of bad debate. However, there's no one's bad debate. You simply resolve that counter-interpret debate. Whoever interprets is actually the norm for the debate. Your these points that topic keep changing. However, the overarching argument solves classified here. The C point is that theory and terms are binary, which means that easier to set a norm. However, this is something that's easier to set a norm. If I win a topicality interpretation, that means that topicality interpretation is a norm for the debate. Simply because there are conflicting definitions about the topic, doesn't mean you can't set a norm. You say fairness ways and future debate. Prefer the in-round fairness impacts because there's no way for me to know whether it influences future debates or not. We're debating it within this round, which means that we should prioritize impacts within this round.
Okay, I think your signposting is a little inefficient. Like, okay. You don't need to fully summarize. You don't need to summarize the argument at the depth you're doing it. Like the way Jessica did it in the video, right, was in semis versus Danny was like, off your first argument, first this, second this, third this. Off your second argument, first this, second this.
Can I do that without just summarizing an argument off number one?
You definitely can. I think you need to keep your eyes up onto your judge to see how well they've been flowing, right? If your judge is somebody who's really good at flowing, which I'm not, then it's fine to do that. It helps for in front of judges like me who are a little weaker at flowing.
How do you know? Obviously, I don't want to ask a question like, "Are you good at flowing?" That's like.
Well, you can ask like, how comprehensive are your flows? Like, do you want my is it okay if my signposting is brief, or should I fully explain the argument I'm responding to?
Let me write that down. Wait, so what's the question I should ask?
You can say, how comprehensive are your flows? I.e., do you want me to signpost like really in depth in terms of which argument I'm responding to, or is a brief reference to the argument sufficient?
Okay.
Right? Like, you don't need to be accusatory and be like, yo, do you suck at flowing? There's a nice way to ask that question. Yeah. Okay. I think that the work on norms don't exist is quite good. I think that the only real argument that well, there is no real argument that exists if norms don't exist. So you take out all the internal links there, which is good. I think the in-round versus out-of-round abuse weighing can be a lot better. There should be the verification argument that, like, part of the reason we prefer in-round abuse is because it's verifiable.
What's the impact of verifiability again?
I think verifiability should be a necessary constraint on theory rules, and the reason why is because you're voting someone down for cheating, so we should be able to say they actually cheated.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember I made that argument at camp. Someone remarked like how long that it's too long, so I couldn't find a way to cut down like a really long explanation. But I think the explanation that you just gave was pretty.
It should be like 1 sentence long.
Okay.
Like, verifiability key because you vote me down for cheating. You need to be able to make sure you did so,
Okay.
or I did so, rather.
I thought you were saying never talk to the judge. Like, if you say you vote me down for cheating. It's like theory means vote me down for cheating.
Right, like, don't vote me down for cheating if it's not possible to verify it. I did. Cool. Any other questions?
So the arguments were fine?
Yeah, the arguments were fine. How long did that take?
155.
155. Probably a little bit too long.
Yeah.
We should try to get this down to 1:15. The last thing I want to note here is Presumably, the 1N doesn't read T outweighs theory because you don't know if the 1AR will read theory.
Right.
But against certain debaters, it's worth your time to do that if you know that it's their strategy to uplayer on with theory, right? Like debaters like Jackson or Tom Cady were almost always going to introduce a new 1AR shell, which means it's worth your time to preempt that and do weighing.
Wait, for the verifiability, it's like don't vote me down for cheating. Wait, how do you get out of you right there?
We'll write it out explicitly.
Yeah.
Worry about that later.
Okay.
Do you understand what I'm saying in terms of strategy right now, though?
Yeah. If like you want to do the weighing, if like you know the what you're supposed to.
Right. And so the other world in which you want to do the weighing is when you think T is the predominant strategy that's going to win you this debate. Like when you read a T shell and it's like 3-4 minutes long and you don't really have much offense against the AF, you only have like a minute or two of arguments, you can spend the other minute or two setting up the paradigm stuff for T.
Oh, say if they don't weigh in the 1AR, can the 2NR be like, oh, you should like you not even air neg. Like you should, or sort of air neg. You should evaluate the weighing debate after the 2NR has ended because base my strategy off the 1AR said if the 1AR doesn't do weighing, don't allow any 2AR weighing because I don't have a 3NR to respond to.
I think you can make that argument, but judges aren't persuaded by it.
Probably.
Right? No judge is going to ignore the 2AR on the theory versus T debate question. I think the smarter way to make the argument is the 1AR had an equal opportunity to weigh theory versus T, given that I introduced the theory shell first, which means give me preference on the weighing debate here, because I'm the only one attempting to explain to you how you should resolve these two arguments against each other.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Cool. Any other questions?
No, yeah.
Okay.